This training includes on-screen sign language interpreting and captioning. Audio description is incorporated into the manner in which the training is presented.
This is Module 4 of the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines training. In this module, we will cover the supplemental technical requirements in Chapter 4. The supplemental technical requirements are basically taking the building guidelines and that are in the ADA accessibility guidelines and adapting them to the needs of the public right-of-way environment. These sections include R402, protruding objects in vertical clearance, R403, operable parts, R404, clear spaces, R405, knee and toe clearance, R406, reach ranges, R407, ramps, R408, stairs, R409, handrails, R410, visual characters on signs, and R411, the international symbol of accessibility. Let's start with protruding objects, section 4, R402. Protruding objects in vertical clearance. Protrusion limits. This is the same as what's in the building standards, is what I've mentioned earlier, but the objects with leading edges more than 27 inches and less than 80 inches above the walking surface cannot protrude horizontally more than 4 inches into a pedestrian circulation path. There is one exception to that, and that is if you have a handrail in the circulation path, the handrail is permitted to protrude 4.5 inches maximum. When you have a post-mounted object, where objects are mounted on posts or pylons, they must comply with R402.3. And again, the sloping portions of handrails serving stairs and ramps are not required to comply with R402.3. Now, where objects are mounted on a single post or pylon, and the objects are more than 27 inches high and less than 80 inches above the walking surface, the objects cannot protrude into the pedestrian circulation path more than 4 inches, measured horizontally from the post or pylon, or more than 4 inches, measured horizontally from the outside edge of the base, where the base height is 2.5 inches minimum. This is a different requirement than is in the building standards. In the building standards, you're allowed currently to protrude much further out from a post or pylon. This change in the public right-of-way guidelines is to address the fact that it's still a protruding object, whether it's mounted on a post or whether it's mounted on something else. And so the limit is 4 inches, but recognizing that some signs can be larger than the 4 inches on either side of a post or pylon. And so what we require in that condition is that you can put a base on the post or pylon, like what is shown to you in figure B in this slide, and then you measure that 4-inch maximum protrusion from the base to the outer edge of the sign, so that you can have a larger sign on the post, but it has to have a base if it's going to be stick out further than 4 inches from the post. Now, objects that are mounted between posts or pylons, and if the clear distance between the posts or pylons is greater than 12 inches, that means that somebody could walk between the poles, then the lowest edge of the object must be either 27 inches maximum or 80 inches minimum above the walking surface. So it can be above your head and you can walk between those two poles and you're perfectly fine at 80 inches. But if it's lower than 80 inches, it has to be down at 27, or at least its detectable edge has to be at 27. Objects mounted with the lowest edge greater than 27 inches and less than 80 inches above the walking surface are permitted if a barrier within its lowest edge of 27 inches maximum above the walking surface is provided between the posts or pylons. So you can put like a bar or something at the appropriate cane detectable edge or point and still have the sign at somewhere between 27 and 80 inches. Vertical clearance. This is where you're walking under something like maybe an exposed stairway or a exposed escalator or that type of thing. The 80-inch minimum height is basically the standard height for a standing person. Now, a lot of times with some of these signs, like what I showed you on the previous slide, if you're having to meet MUTCD requirements, that MUTCD requirement is much higher than 80 inches. And so you're actually going to meet these requirements because it's 8 inches high minimum, not a maximum. So guards or other barriers need to be provided to prohibit pedestrian travel when the vertical clearance for the pedestrian travel may get below 80 inches. So, and then the lowest edge of the guard or barrier must be located 27 inches maximum above the walking surface. And protruding objects cannot reduce the clear width required for pedestrian access routes. Now, let's talk about our operable parts in R403. A clear space complying with R404 is required at operable parts. Reach range compliant with R406 for the forward reach and the side reach are talked about in R406. And then the operable part has to be operable with one hand and not require tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist. If you remember when I was talking in the second half of chapter 3's module, you remember me speaking about operable with one hand and not requiring tight pinching or tight grasping or pinching or twisting of the wrist. And a good example of this that is shown in this slide is the old push buttons that had a little tiny button that sometimes was like placed inside of a hole where you had to stick one finger in there to push the button. Those are considered to be inaccessible, and they're really not used these days if you've got an up-to-date accessible pedestrian signal. A better accessible option for that pedestrian push button is a push button that's easily pressed with just an open hand, or even you could, if you're for some reason have a disability where you don't have a hand, you can bump it with your elbow and still activate the signal. Now, clear space was talked about in the previous slide. The clear space is the 30 by 48 inches minimum. This is in R404. The surface has to comply with R302.6, which is stable, firm, and slip resistant. It needs to be positioned either for a forward or a parallel approach. That means that the object you're reaching for is either in front of you or parallel to you. One fully unobstructed side must adjoin a pedestrian accessible route or adjoin another clear floor space. It's a 2.1% maximum slope in both directions, but you are allowed to exceed 2.1% slope due to grade of the adjacent pedestrian access route if it complies with R302.4. So we're not asking you to flatten a sidewalk that we've allowed you to follow the roadway. We're just wanting you to be aware that the optimum is for it to be 2.1 in both directions, but there are allowances and exceptions that allow you, when you're on a sidewalk that already complies with R302.4, that it's acceptable to put a clear space on that sidewalk and not have to flatten it. Where a clear space is confined on all or part of three sides, in other words, in an alcove, either created by construction or created because of just where it's located. Additional maneuvering space is required complying with either R404.7.1 forward approach or R404.7.2 parallel approach. And basically it's based on a forward approach. If it's great, if the depth of the alcove is greater than 24 inches, you need to provide 36 inches of width instead of the 30-inch width. And if it's a side of the parallel approach, if it's deeper than 15 inches, then instead of only 48 inches in length, it has to be 60 inches in length to allow for maneuvering in a parallel parking orientation for the mobility device to be able to reach the object you're trying to reach. Now, for a forward approach, the clear space and additional maneuvering clearance must be 36 inches wide minimum where the depth of the confined space exceeds 24 inches. So it's basically half of the 48. And then the same thing happens with the confined clear floor space on a parallel approach. It's half of, if it's more than half of the 30 inches, you provide the additional foot, making it instead of 48 inches, it becomes 60 inches in length. Toe clearance. It is possible to have toe clearance under section R405 that does not include knee clearance, but you never have knee clearance without toe clearance. I just want to say that. So toe clearance is the space under an element between the ground surface and 9 inches above the ground surface. The maximum depth of knee and toe space is 25 inches, but for the maximum depth of toe clearance is it's only counted 6 inches. So that's the maximum depth of toe clearance. This is showing you the overall dimensions of both knee and toe. And I'll explain that in the next slide. So in here you have knee clearance that also includes toe clearance, because you obviously when you're sitting in a wheelchair or even in a regular chair, your toes come before your knees do. So knee clearance is the space under an element between 9 inches and 27 inches above the ground surface. The maximum depth is 25 inches under the element at 9 inches above the ground surface. The minimum depth of 11 inches at 9 inches above the ground surface, and then 8 inches of that 25 inches is at 27 inches above the ground surface. I will show you some additional drawings in the next couple of slides that will help explain this. And the width is 30 inches wide minimum, of course, unless it's in an alcove, and then it becomes 36 inches, which we talked about a couple of slides ago. So the clearance reduction, okay, basically your toe space is 9 inches high and 6 inches maximum. And then for a portion of the 11 inches of knee space, you can taper that at a 6-to-1 slope for 3 inches that gets you up to 27 inches. And then the last 8 inches, making 17 total between the 8, 3, and 6, is at 27 inches high. And then if you need additional beyond the 17 inches, you add that additional space to the knee space, not to the toe space. So when you're reaching forward, reach range forward approach, high reach is 48 inches maximum above the ground, and the low reach is 15 inches above the ground. And remember, when you're doing a forward approach, it is not possible typically for most wheelchair users to reach beyond their toes. So if you want somebody to reach something, you can't expect them to reach beyond as far as their toes are allowed to go forward. So that line there right here that you see where your toes hit the wall is basically your reach range limit as far as the horizontal amount that you can reach forward. And then the height If it's unobstructed, like this one is, it's the maximum, the height reach is 48 inches. It is lower. And we don't allow an obstructed reach in the public right-of-way guidelines. That's one thing that was proposed in the proposed rule and continues in the final rule, is that we do not allow an obstruction other than the maximum of 10 inches, which I'm showing to you right here with the side reach. There's no obstruction on a forward reach, but on a side reach, we allow a 10-inch maximum obstruction on the parallel or side reach, kind of using parallel and side to be synonymous here. The depth of the obstruction, 10 inches max, and the height of the obstruction is 34 inches maximum. This becomes really important with push buttons, because push button accessible push pedestrian signals, or any kind of pedestrian signal that requires you to push a button, can't be in the rose bushes away from the prepared surface more than 10 inches, because you don't want to have to, you can't reach further than 10 inches to your side to push the button, and that's to keep that in mind. So let's go into ramps, R407. Now, these ramp requirements do not apply to curb ramps or pedestrian access routes following the grade established for the adjacent street, consistent with the requirements of 302.4.1. This type of ramp is a ramp that it may be on the right of way, but it's usually a ramp that's leading from the sidewalk level to the to a building entrance, or to something else like a pedestrian overpass or underpass. Those requirements basically follow exactly the same requirement as building standards, except for a couple little differences. And that is, the maximum running slope of a ramp is 1 in 12. If it's steeper than 1 in 12, it's not acceptable. That's 8.3% for the percent option. Cross slope is the usual 2.1%, or 1 to 48. The clear width is a little different. In the building guidelines, we only require a 36-inch wide, but in the public right-of-way requirements, if it's in the public right-of-way, it's going to be 48 inches minimum in width, unless the ramp only serves a building entrance. If all it's doing is taking you up to a building entrance, and that's the only thing that ramp is doing, then it is permitted to only be 36 inches wide. It is not required to be 48 inches wide. So there is an exception for the 48-inch width requirement. Now, the maximum rise for a ramp is 30 inches. You can only, for one ramp run, you can only raise 34 inches in height. Now, or 30 inches in height, I'm sorry. Landing is required at the top and the bottom of each run. And the landings, the slope is 2.1% parallel and perpendicular to the ramp running slope. So both the cross slope and the running slope is 2.1% maximum. The landing clear width is at least as wide as the widest ramp run leading to the landing, and the length of that landing is 60 inches minimum. If you do a change in direction at the ramp, at ramp runs, where you may have a 90-degree turn, or even a 180-degree turn, or a dogleg turn, as it's sometimes referred to as, ramps that change direction between runs at landings must have a clear landing 60 inch by 60 inches. No matter what the width of the ramp is, the landing is 60 by 60 if you're having to turn on that landing. Now, that applies to any change in direction. It's not just a 90 or a 180. If it's anywhere between 0 and 180-degree change in direction, it's change in direction and requires the 60 by 60 landing. Handrails are required on both sides of ramp runs when the rise of the ramp is higher than 6 inches. Now, I am going to repeat what I said earlier here because I cannot stress this more than anything, is that these requirements in R407 do not apply to a curb ramp. So this is a ramp, and if it raises more than 6 inches, it's required to have handrails on both sides. And then you have to have 12-inch extensions of both the bottom and the top of the handrail. And it cannot be obstructed more than 20% of the length of the handrail for the gripping surface and all the other requirements that are specified in 407, including it can't be a protruding object, which addresses this thing that the bottom edge of your P extension, it's usually called a P extension because it makes the shape of a P, is the bottom edge of that should be at or below 27 inches so that it doesn't become a protruding object. Now, edge protection. Edge protection must be provided on each side of the ramp run and each side of ramp landings, except those serving an adjoining ramp run or a stairway or other pedestrian circulation path. We don't want to have a curb before a set of stairs because that's essentially a tripping hazard. So the edge protection must be provided on each side of the ramp runs and each side of ramp landings, except with the landings. The landing may serve both the ramp and the stairs that may be going at a 90-degree angle from the ramp. And we wouldn't require edge protection on the part that leads to the steps or the stairway. There are several different options for edge protection. You have the extended ramp surface, which is shown here. You have the railing. You extend the ramp surface 12 inches beyond the railings. Or in the next images we show here, that continues edge protection, you could do a curb. It's 4 inches high, or a barrier would be like maybe a lower rail on your handrail that is low enough that it doesn't permit a 4-inch sphere to pass through the space between the bottom of the ramp and the railing. And that requirement is a life safety requirement more than anything else, so that children don't get their heads stuck between that railing and the ramp surface. Now let's talk about stairs. Stairs are generally not very accessible, but they do have requirements. And this is if the stair is in the pedestrian access route. All steps on a flight of stairs must have uniform riser height and uniform tread depth. This is very consistent with the building guidelines that you have to have the same riser height throughout your stairway. So this riser height is 4-inch high minimum, 7 inches high maximum. But what you do is you pick a dimension. If you want your risers to be 5 inches high, all of your risers have to be 5 inches high. You can't have one that's at 4 and one that's 6 and one that's 7. Minimum tread depth is 11 inches. Open risers are not permitted if it's a stair in the right of way. And the stairs must have handrails complying with R409. Your stair nosing, and this is one of the reasons why open risers are not permitted, is because some people with some disabilities that they're semi-ambulatory and may be using the stairs, some will drag their foot up the step. And that's why open risers are not permitted, because you can get your foot caught in that condition if you don't have the ability to keep your foot from moving forward and under that riser. So that's why we require the no open risers. But the nosing is important as well, because we don't want to trap a person's toes as they're dragging it up the edge of the stair. So you either do a 1/2 inch maximum radius with a straight riser, or you do an angled riser of 30 inches maximum if you're doing an angled riser, or if you do a curved or beveled nosing, it's 1.5 inches maximum and it's beveled so that it doesn't trap a person's toes under it. Now, this is a requirement that that has been put into the final rule specifically for stairs in the right of way. So this isn't just stairs to a building. This is actually showing you a stair to a building. But it's the slide that we had, or picture we had available. We require a visual contrast at the leading edge of each step, tread, and the top of the landing. So it must be marked with a visual contrasting stripe. That can be done in yellow. It doesn't have to be yellow. It just needs to contrast with its surrounding surface, dark on light or light on dark. And it's a 1 inch minimum wide strip. And it's graphically shown to you here in this example, where they have black stairs with a yellow tread marker at the beginning of each tread and at the top of each landing. Handrails. Let's talk about handrails. Handrails that are required at ramps and stairs, and handrails provided on pedestrian circulation paths must comply with 409. Remember, our 409, like 407, does not apply to curb ramps. If you haven't figured it out by now, we don't want curb ramps to have handrails. So handrail, this is really important to understand this bullet. Handrails that are required at ramps and stairs, and handrails provided on the pedestrian circulation path. We don't require them on the pedestrian circulation path, but if you provide any kind of handrail on a circulation path in the right of way, it's going to need to meet the requirements of 409. Now I'm talking about handrails and not guardrails. I want to make sure that's clear as well. Must be provided on both sides of ramps and stairs, must be continuous within the full length of each ramp run or stair flight. The inside handrail on switchbacks or dogleg ramps must be continuous between the ramp runs or stair flights. And handrails cannot rotate within their fittings. Where expansion joints are necessary for large spans of handrails, the expansion joint is permitted to rotate in its fitting, but only the expansion joint, not the whole railing. Handrail height and gripping surface. The top of the gripping surface of handrails must be between 34 inches and 38 inches maximum, measured vertically above the walking surface, ramp surfaces, and stair nosings. Handrails must be at a consistent height above the walking surface, ramp surface, and stair nosing. So what that means is that you can't have a stair or a ramp handrail that changes heights along the way. It needs to be a consistent height and stay a consistent height above those surfaces. Handrail gripping surfaces and any surfaces adjacent to them must be free of sharp or abrasive elements and have rounded edges. The reason for that is because usually the people using these types of handrails in this condition are maybe people with that are semi-ambulatory but need support to help them get up and down the stair or the ramp, and so they're leaning pretty heavily on these handrails, and so they need to not be abrasive. And they're also sometimes keeping their hand on the handrail all the way down and sliding their hand along it. So we don't want that surface to be rough or abrasive. Handrail gripping surfaces must extend beyond and in the same direction of ramp runs and stair flights. The handrail extensions cannot extend into the roadway or pedestrian circulation path. So in new construction, you design it in such a way that that doesn't happen. So the stairs or the ramp ends before you're entering the circulation path or the roadway. In alterations, if a handrail extension would reduce the clear width of a pedestrian access route They must extend as far as possible without reducing the width of the pedestrian access route. So that's in alteration conditions because you may not be able to change the situation. But in new construction, when it's all on paper, there shouldn't be an excuse not to provide that extension. So that the exception is specifically for alterations. Clearance around handrails. This is so you can grip it properly. The minimum 1/2 inch clearance requirement around between the handrail gripping surface and adjacent surfaces. Handrail gripping surface must be continuous along their length and cannot be obstructed along the tops or sides. The bottoms of handrail gripping surfaces cannot be obstructed for more than 20% of their length. So we do recognize they do have to have mounting points, but they don't need to have so many mounting points that they're essentially the whole rail is not available for gripping. Now, where provided, horizontal projections can occur 1/2 inches minimum below the bottom of the handrail gripping surface. And that's shown to you here that your whatever you've got your handrail attached to, you're going to need to occasionally do a horizontal connection, and those connections can happen as long as they're 1.5 inches minimum below the bottom of the handrail gripping surface. Circular cross sections. Handrails, if you have a circular cross section, it's fairly simple. Handrail gripping surfaces with a circular cross section must have an outside diameter of 1.25 inches minimum and 2 inches maximum. Non-circular cross sections gets a little more complicated, but we do allow a non-circular cross section. That handrail gripping surface with a non-circular cross section must have a perimeter dimension of 4 inches minimum and 6.25 inches maximum, and a cross section dimension of 2.25 inches maximum. Where expansion joints are necessary for large spans of handrails, the expansion joint cross-section is permitted to be smaller than the specified cross-section diameter for 1 inch maximum in length. So we do recognize that you may have to put an expansion joint in, and that's usually done with a smaller diameter rail. So we do permit that for long expansions. Now let's talk about R410 and the visual characters on signs. Notice we don't talk about Braille in chapter 4 because signs in the public right-of-way are not in a consistent location like they are in a building, and we can't say put the sign on the strike side of the door because there's not a whole lot of doors in the public right-of-way. So finish and contrast, we deal with the visual characters on the signs in 410. The finish and contrast, characters and their backgrounds must have a non-glare finish in contrast with their background with either a light character on a dark background or a dark character on a light background. Case, the characters can be uppercase or lowercase or a combination of both. The style must be conventional in form. They cannot be italics, oblique, script, or highly decorative or other unusual forms. Character proportions must be selected from fonts where the width of the uppercase letter O is 55% minimum and 110% maximum of the height of the uppercase letter I. All this may sound a little difficult, but most of your sign manufacturing companies will understand all this. Stroke thickness of the uppercase letter I must be 10% minimum and 30% maximum of the height of the character. That's the stroke thickness. Now, character height. The minimum character height must comply with table R410.6. Viewing distance must be measured as the horizontal distance between the character and an obstruction preventing further approach towards the sign. Character height must be based on the uppercase I. So the height is based on the viewing distance, and there's a range that's specified in 410.6, R410.6, that gives you the height of the character based on the horizontal distance between the character and any obstruction preventing further approach towards the sign. So the further away the sign is, the bigger the letters need to be for those signs that have to comply with these requirements. And if you remember from chapter 2, when Juliet talked about the scoping for these signs, we're talking about signs that are specifically meant to be used by pedestrians, not the signs that are specifically meant to be used by drivers. So don't worry, we're not requiring these requirements on every sign out in the right of way. We're talking about signs that are specifically been provided for pedestrians to use, not the ones that are not specifically for pedestrians. Character spacing must be measured between the two closest points of adjacent characters, excluding the word spaces. Spacing between individual characters must be 10% minimum and 35% maximum of the character height. Line spacing between the baseline of separated lines of characters within a message must be 135% minimum and 170% maximum of the character height. And then the height from the ground surface, visual characters shall be 40 inches minimum above the ground surface. And last but not least, in chapter 4, we have the International Symbol of Accessibility. Everyone should be fairly familiar with the symbol, and the symbol in its background must have a non-glare finish, and it must contrast with its background with either a light symbol on a dark background or a dark symbol on a light background. And just real quick, I want to mention that we have a white paper on the discussion of the International Symbol of Accessibility and those other designs that people are coming up with to make it more dynamic and all that kind of thing. This is the international symbol that you see here is the international symbol that's accepted by the International Symbol Organization, or ISO. And it's an international organization. This symbol is understood not just in the US, it is understood in Australia, it's understood in Korea, it's understood all over the world as the International Symbol of Accessibility, and it means the same thing in every country you go to. And so we want you to use the International Symbol of Accessibility. Now, this concludes the U.S. Access Board training on the finalized public right-of-way accessibility guidelines. If you have questions or on the content of the training provided, you can send an email to row@access-board.gov or call our TA line at 202-272-0080 and use extension 3. And we'd be glad to answer your questions. Thank you.